I have no idea where to even begin with making predictions for this Nets team. I guess my only advice would be stay far, far, far away from betting on or against the team this year. At this stage, if someone traveled from the future and told me that either the Nets won the title or they finished with the worst record in the league, I think I could be convinced of either or literally anything in between. Gun to my head, though, at 55, or I'm sorry, at 50 and a half wins, I would take the under. There's just too much drama and uncertainty surrounding this team. The hard thing about betting against them, though, is just how talented they are. If you take out the human element, as if this were NBA 2K or something, there are very few rosters in the league that stack up against the Nets talent wise. Proof of that was on full display last season when, prior to Kevin Durant getting hurt, they were threatening to get the number one seed out east, and with no Kyrie and an out of shape, uninterested version of James Harden. Now, this season, they're going to be getting Kyrie Irving back full time, who's as skilled as any player we've ever seen in the league. Then they finally are going to get to add Ben Simmons, who's this all world defensive player and a transcendent talent. Maybe not a transcendent player, but that once in a generation raw talent is still in there somewhere. I mean, the guy's made all NBA and all defensive teams, and that's having not added a single thing to his game since entering the league. Improved on some things, sure, but he's not really added or built anything to his game. To round out the roster, they're adding 3-and-D specialist Royce O'Neal. They get TJ Warren, a proven playoff scorer, and an enforcer in Markieff Morris. They're also bringing back guys back like Patty Mills, Nick Claxton, and have a couple of interesting rookies from last season's team and Day'Ron Sharpe and Cam Thomas, who showed flashes of being rotational players. So presumably they're going to be better this year. They're also hopefully getting back a fully healthy Joe Harris and Seth Curry this year. And while Bruce Brown was obviously a big loss, that's somewhat mitigated by them replacing him with Ben Simmons. That's obviously a huge upgrade in that spot. The rest of the losses were almost additions by subtraction with guys like Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge, Goran Dragic, and Andre Drummond. Sure, Drummond and Dragic can still play in this league, but it looks like this is going to be it for the careers of Blake Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge. It doesn't look like anyone's going to be picking them up. And as for last season, one of the big reasons the Nets got swept by the Celtics in the first round was the lack of flexibility they had with their lineups. At times, the Nets were forced to run lineups with like 3 or 4 small guards, maybe mix in some Bruce Brown there and Kevin Durant at the five, just to get 5 guys on the court who could actually play productive basketball. So, at least on paper, this roster has absolutely been improved. And the deficiencies that led to their early exit in the playoffs last year have been corrected and addressed. But basketball isn't played on paper, nor does 2K have any bearing over anything. So once we add back in the human element, that's where things with this team start to fall apart. And pretty much top to bottom with almost everyone on this roster, there's a huge red flag or up to 10 in some cases. And it would be really hard to describe an offseason where a team made some pretty drastic improvements as a disaster, but make no mistake about it, the Nets offseason was just a total dumpster fire. So let's start like going through each player on this team that has something weird, something crazy going on with them this offseason, or just general concerns. And we have to start with the team's best player, Kevin Durant. He demanded a trade this offseason. And in the media day for the Nets, he cited the culture and the lack of accountability as being the reason he wants out, which is a little bit like that Eric Andre meme where he shoots the guy sitting in the chair and then it's like, oh, who could have done this? That's what it felt like to me. I mean, this whole Nets thing is his doing. He chose to hitch his wagon to Kyrie when he headed there. He chose to push the team to trade all their depth and draft picks to get James Harden. He even got a very well respected coach in this league and Kenny Atkinson fired to bring in his guy and Steve Nash, which he now wants fired. So where is your accountability in all of this, Kevin Durant? And I know he said in the media day that he leaves all of this stuff to the GM, but we know that that just isn't true. And I'm honestly really happy that the Nets stood up to him. Now everyone is just sort of forced to make it work. Kevin Durant signed an extension last offseason, so unless he wants to retire, he's going to be forced to play for the Nets. And the Nets are also forced to make this work because they traded all of their draft picks to get James Harden. So tanking at this stage does them no good. And since you're not going to get one for one value when you trade a guy like Kevin Durant, they're just going to have to work with him. So now, sort of like a bad marriage where both sides just stay together for the kids. That's kind of what this Nets situation has become. I think injury is also a huge concern with respect to the Nets and specifically Kevin Durant. Entering his 16th year in the league with the injuries really starting to pile up, can he stay healthy for most of a regular season and a playoff run? And then there's now with the trade demand, there's this other weird element where even if it's something minor, since he's so unhappy in this situation, if he gets nicked up at all, is he going to milk that injury to sit out longer? I know Kevin Durant loves playing basketball, so this move wouldn't come from a place of like, I don't want to play or I don't want to get out there and hoop, but more of a trade value perspective. Kevin Durant is keenly aware that his trade value is solely what prevented him from being dealt this offseason. He even made a comment about it during media day. So would he milk an injury maybe a little longer than he needed to sabotage his perceived trade value so that a deal could get done? I don't know. Maybe he would. Also, kind of along the lines of injury is just the sheer amount of basketball that Kevin Durant has played throughout his career. There are starting to be some real signs that they were on full display in that Celtics series that the end of his prime is upon us. And that's not crazy to say for a player entering his 16th season, but he really had a lot of trouble in that Celtics series. I don't want to overreact too much since I kind of maintain that last year's Celtics team was the best defensive team I've seen since the 2004 Pistons, but I still can't unsee what I saw in that series. And it wasn't just the case of Jason Tatum just completely overwhelming Kevin Durant with youth and athleticism. Al Horford spent a lot of time guarding Kevin Durant, and Durant had a ton of trouble beating Al Horford off the dribble. So I think at most we have 2 more years of this top 10 version, top 10 player in the league version of Kevin Durant. Next up on my list of players with just weirdness surrounding them is Kyrie Irving. And sort of like Kevin Durant, he's reluctantly back on this next team. He, like Durant, wanted to leave the Nets. However, unlike Kevin Durant, he had the option to be an unrestricted free agent this offseason, tried to just bully his way to the Lakers. And once again, props to the Nets for standing up to him because in order for Kyrie to get to the Lakers, the Nets would have had to take back Russell Westbrook. So I'm sure the Nets had a few choice words for Kyrie when that was being kicked around. And then for Kyrie, outside of that super desperate Laker team, no one else was really interested in him given his flakiness. And during the media day, Kyrie tried to state that the narrative kind of surrounding his flakiness has solely to do with his vaccination status. And in fairness to him, it was really bad luck that he just happened to play in a city that had a really weird and backwards COVID policy that prevented him from playing home games. And that isn't a political statement. It just was weird. Like he wasn't able to play at first because they didn't allow people indoors if they weren't vaccinated for entertainment purposes. But then later on, it only extended to residents of the city. So, like, if a band was coming in to perform a concert from out of town, it was cool if they were unvaccinated. Or in the case of like opposing players who were unvaccinated, they could come to Brooklyn and play, but because Kyrie was in the city, he couldn't. So just a really weird rule. So yeah, that I mean that sucks, but guess what, Kyrie? You weren't the only player in the league to not get vaccinated. And that isn't the reason why we think you're flaky. So let's just quickly go through the timeline of Kyrie flakiness. And if I forget or I misremember something, please forgive me. I'm doing this off the top of my head, so I will do my best. So back in the Cleveland days, he demands a trade, forces his way out, and to be fair to Kyrie, That was after the organization tried to trade him to acquire Paul George. So he ends up getting shipped out to Boston, where he really does nothing to ingratiate himself to that team and to that city. He promises to re-sign with the team, and then he pretty much spends that whole last season with one foot out the door before leaving to Brooklyn. Again, somewhat defensible here. Kyrie didn't ask to go to Boston. He got sent there. He didn't really owe them anything, but I think the promises that he gave to resign with the team were unnecessary if that's not what he planned to do, to say the least. So now fast forward to that first year in Brooklyn. Kevin Durant is out for the year, and Kyrie sort of just comes and goes as he pleases. He has this mystery shoulder injury, and from what I remember, he really wasn't doing a great job of communicating what was going on to the team. So he's just sort of in and out of the lineup. And when he wasn't in the lineup, he just wasn't showing up. Eventually, he ends up having season ending shoulder surgery and only plays something like 20 games. So just sort of a weird year there. And sure, if he was injured, no reason with Kevin Durant out for him to really push it in a meaningless season. Second year with the Nets, he just up and leaves the team. Like he just comes in and says, I'm leaving, gives no reason, no timetable for when he would return. And I understand not giving any of that information to the media, but your coaches and teammates deserve something there. So, yeah, safe to say the vaccination thing wasn't the first issue. And like the vaccination thing, if you view all of these events as isolated events, they could be forgiven and forgotten. But when it's basically every single season and absolutely at every single stop, well, actions speak louder than words. You just kind of are flaky at this point. So who's to say this season won't be more of the same from Kyrie? Who's to say we won't just see him vanish and then just kind of quit on the year and just look for a fresh start somewhere new next season? I don't know. It could happen. Next up on my red flag list is Ben Simmons, and I think we all know why he has the red flag next to his name. So, to save everyone a lot of time, I'm not going to go into the whole Philly saga again, but the Nets saga is just as crazy, and I'll just kind of briefly go through that. He gets traded from Philly at the trade deadline, and he kind of starts by requesting a few weeks to kind of ramp back up his conditioning. Totally fair, makes sense, hasn't played basketball in a long time. But then he tweaks the back issue that he cited at the beginning of the year in Philadelphia. And then a few weeks turn into a few months. And then before you know it, we're in the playoffs and we still haven't seen him play. And it all culminates in this really weird game 4 of the first round situation where he says he's coming back and he's going to be back for game 4, only to be like, whoops, never mind, I can't play the day of the game. He gets surgery this offseason on the back, so presumably it actually was an issue and not just an excuse to get out of playing basketball. But it is weird that he didn't have that surgery or attend to that back issue during his time off prior to being traded to the Nets. There's also this whole vague, weird mental health component that was also cited as a reason why he couldn't play in Philly. And again, it may have all been legit, but just nothing was being communicated to anybody involved, be it the fans or anyone within the 76ers and Nets organizations. So we're just left with questions of the truthfulness of his claims because it seems like he was just kind of throwing out reasons of why he couldn't play at the wall until he found something that stuck. And then during the media day, just a few days ago, he seemed really surprised and annoyed when people were asking him questions about his mental health state. And to be fair, it was really only a handful of questions. It seemed like most of the questions he was receiving was with regards to his back injury or just his fit with the team, and none of the questions surrounding his mental health were particularly intrusive, I didn't think. Just questions like, how are you feeling kind of coming into the season? Where's your head at? And just stuff like that. And Ben, eventually, one of the questions he responded, he was like, I feel good. I've worked on myself a lot this summer and I feel really good. And so the reporter asked a follow-up question. He said, what kinds of things did you do to work on yourself? Seems like a fairly innocent question to me. It's not like he asked him if he has daddy issues or anything crazy. So it could have been an opportunity for Simmons to raise awareness to mental health in this country, even saying something as simple as, I worked with a professional. Like I worked with a professional on some of my anxiety issues. Just something vague, but like a little bit more than I worked on myself. That's really all he had to say. But instead, he got annoyed and said that he was done speaking on it. And listen, mental health is a huge concern in this country. I think it's one of the biggest issues that we face as a society. So, whatever he was dealing with, I sincerely hope that he got the help that he needed. But I still would have liked to have seen him handle kind of the media day a little bit differently to either help raise awareness or help someone else who's going through something similar. It just seems like a terrible waste. As far as the basketball concerns go this year, I mean, who's to say that either the back or mentally Simmons is ready to go? It's been something like 18 months off of basketball for him. So is he still going to be at that same all defensive all star level, or has he regressed a bit? He isn't exactly someone who's known as being a gym rat. So, how long is it going to take him to kind of get back up to speed? The rest of the roster is more your traditional concerns, a lot less crazy, be it aging, injuries, or both. Joe Harris missed pretty much all of last season. Seth Curry ended the year banged up, and he struggled with injuries throughout his career. Patty Mills is getting on up there in years. TJ Warren has missed pretty much 2 full seasons of basketball. He only played 4 games in 2021, and he hasn't been cleared for basketball activities yet. So, will he even be half as good as he was when he was on the Pacers? Just top to bottom, there's just nothing but red flags on this team. Too many for me to take this team seriously as a title contender, even if the talent is there.